we're seeing, companies with strong clinical data be able to get from concept to market much quicker. And that's going to be one of the things that I think changes patient care in the biggest way. A person is more than you can see in a quick 5-minute session, and they're more than just a collection of symptoms. You can't just take a pill to solve everything. A lot of it does have to do with lifestyle and decisions. The empowering of patients to manage their data, to have access to their data, to be able to generate and take a bigger part of their care is a really big trend.
Hey everyone, this is Prashant and I'll be host for the VC 10X podcast, and today we'll be tackling some of the biggest questions in the future of healthcare. What if we could just predict a disease like cancer 5 years before it even develops? What is the real role of AI in the doctor's office? Is it a partner or a replacement? And how can the smallest lifestyle changes become more powerful than any pill we can take? To guide us through these monumental shifts is Sam Libby, a veteran healthcare investment banker and the founder of TCB Capital Advisors. After a long career, he is now dedicated to a single mission, making a real tangible impact on patient care. So without wasting any time, let's dive straight in. This episode is sponsored by my own podcasting agency called Podcast 10X, where I help venture capitalists, asset managers, allocators, and family offices in starting their own podcast and building a strong brand. Podcast 10X is designed in a way to work well with the busy schedule of investors, where we handle every aspect of podcast production so you can focus on investing. If you're looking to build a strong investor brand, starting a podcast should be right up your priority list. It's the only form of marketing where you can showcase your strong network, in other words, access to limited partners and founders, and grow that network further. And contrary to what most people hear, it's still very early to start a podcast. There are at least 10x more newsletters and 1000x more blogs than there are podcasts in this world. You can learn more about our podcasting services at podcast10x.com. I'll make sure to add the link in the description below. Enjoy this episode. Hey Sam, so good to have you on the VC 10x podcast. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, pleasure having you on. To start things off, can we first have a story behind founding TCB Capital Advisors with a patient first mission that you have there?
Yeah, happy to. So I've spent the entirety of my career as a healthcare investment banker. So worked on a number of different platforms. The last one that I worked on, I was brought in to build out their healthcare practice. They were primarily focused in financial institutions at the time, and then became a principal owner and had an exit from that company. And following that exit, I was really sitting back and saying, what has kind of my career led to? Has there been an actual impact? I mean, I've been in healthcare for the entirety of it, and as a healthcare banker, we always talk about the patient impact and the patient impact. And as I look back, I didn't feel that I had actually impacted human care, the patient care, in a positive way. And so when thinking about what I wanted to do for the rest of my career, that's really where I started. It was saying, okay, how do I do something where first and foremost is the impact on human health and patient outcomes. And so, I've been, blessed and very lucky to, we've grown to about 18 people now. And so my partners, as well as, my board and all of the people that support the company, are really all focused on that mission first. And so we built a unique suite of services. We've made some direct investments, with this being the core mission, where we believe if we're focused on where patients are going to, have a positive impact, everything else is going to work out. We're going to find a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's quite interesting. And from your vantage point, having spent so many years in this industry, what do you think are the most significant transformations that are happening in the healthcare space right now?
It's a good question. So, I mean, things are changing so rapidly right now that it's almost kind of a hard question to answer. I mean, at the forefront for everyone is kind of the evolution of AI. Now, when you look into healthcare, and particularly like diagnostics, AI and machine learning were a core part of genetic testing, liquid biopsy for a really long time. It was more on an applied side. But the bar of accessibility and the cost to be able to leverage some of these tools has dropped, and so we're seeing a lot more innovation. On the other side of ease of innovation is also a lot of noise. There's, a lot of companies in market that are, proposing that they have the cure or the way to screen for a certain patient or to manage a patient's life cycle, but they have no clinical data. And so I think with the AI evolution and revolution, we're seeing companies with strong clinical data be able to get from concept to market much quicker, and that's going to be one of the things that I think changes patient care in the biggest way.
Absolutely, quite interesting. And I've started tracking how early in a conversation does AI come up. This was 2 minutes and 20 seconds for this conversation. Quite early. But I've had ones where it was even earlier than this, but those were AI focused ones. Uh, but to my next question, we are seeing a growing emphasis on proactive and preventative healthcare, right? How are you seeing this play out in the investment landscape?
So, the longevity medicine side of things is really interesting, and the longevity medicine overlapped with prognostic approaches is pretty interesting. So, I mean, when you look at like GLP-1s and what they've done to kind of obesity medicine, that's been one change. But then you look at the clinical trials that Novo is running right now on the potential increase or the potential decrease for the risk of Alzheimer's in people utilizing their products. And so, there's kind of this overlap between preventative or longevity medicine and then, the impacts downstream on neurodegenerative conditions that are extremely debilitating. I mean, when you look at the Alzheimer's space, I mean, there's two approved drugs right now that are for a delay of symptoms. They're not even, there is no cure. And so there's the current paradigm for patients has been hopefully you find what is mild cognitive impairment, the early indicator that a neurodegenerative condition is on the horizon, and you find it soon enough where then treatment can be used. Now, if we can start to offset the risk for these patients with longevity medicine, it's going to be amazing to see what can happen because some of the conditions that happen downstream are so debilitating that even if the you look and you say, okay, it's not a fatal condition. The quality of life decreases so rapidly and so permanently that the further we can delay these things, the better.
Absolutely. And there's also this idea of holistic wellness that has started to gain traction where people have, one, the awareness has started to kick in that there are different aspects of your personal health, like it can be mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, different angles to it, right? How do you see that playing out in the space? And what are you seeing the solutions come up in that space?
Yeah. And, for I'll just say for my own personal healthcare, I've always seen DOs for this exact reason, which is, a person is more than you can see in a quick 5-minute session, and they're more than just a collection of symptoms. I mean, even if something like depression is left unchecked, it can a person can actually have a lot of the same symptoms of an autoimmune condition, and it's actually a mental health issue. And I think the society embracing mental health challenges changes the conversation a lot in this area. And so looking at a person in a holistic view of, you know, is there an illness? Is there a condition that has to be managed? Is there a mental health condition? And how do these all intersect? And then also lifestyle. I mean, diet plays a big factor in, risks of certain cancers. Kind of the society as a whole embracing the fact that if we change our behavior, and sometimes it's the smallest change, can lead to a much more positive outcome for someone 10 years later, 20 years later. We obviously saw that with embracing quitting smoking. Looking at it, it's not just about the cancer risk today, but also what's the impact downstream. But then it's become a much broader conversation around everything from, caffeine to drinking to, food coloring and dyes and other carcinogens. And, it's amazing that that's the way people are thinking now because you can't just take a pill to solve everything. A lot of it does have to do with lifestyle and decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's quite interesting. And these days, I'm also seeing there are certain apps in which you can scan products and it will tell you what are the harmful substances in it and should you avoid that or not, right? So, love the progress that's happening there. And I think in the medium to long term, it will also force companies to avoid including these harmful elements because they will see that that is impacting sales and they will have to, hold true to the numbers and start putting in the right ingredients that are actually good for people, right? Moving on to digital health, which has been a buzzword for years, some really big companies in that space. How are you looking at that right now? What are the trends there?
Yeah, and so I still remember when everything was HCIT, and then it moved to digital health, and it's changed a couple times since then, and kind of now doubled back. Um, So the digital health and health tech side of things, where we're really interested is in areas that impact either directly or downstream patient outcomes. And so anything that can improve clinical workflow so a patient can get treated quickly, and also that we can properly identify the patients that need a specific indication. So one of the areas that's interesting to me is when you think about like neurodegenerative conditions and the clinical trials around there, there's two components that both have the exact same issue. So clinical trial design in neurodegenerative and patient treatment have the same issue, which is can we find the patient quick enough that we can, put them into the process to move forward. And they both have different downstream effects on the patient management or actual clinical side. It's if you can't find them quickly enough, they can't get treated. The therapeutics are no longer eligible, and it's devastating. And on the clinical trial side, there's the same issue, which is if we can't find the patients quickly enough, the clinical trial can't have its endpoints designed appropriately, and then you have potential failures that could otherwise be avoided and therapeutics that don't make it to the market. So there's one side, which is we have to identify patients and get them to the right place as quickly as possible, be it for clinical trial or, for, the standard workflow from going to a doctor to a specialist and then to treatment. On the other side, it's the democratization, as a lot of people like to call it, of healthcare, which is the ability to control more of your data. So, I choose to use an Aura ring or have a glucose monitor. How much data do I myself want to have? And then the play between even the major labs, so the reference labs now offering tests that a person can be able to buy themselves. And so the empowering of patients to manage their data, to have access to their data, to be able to generate and take a bigger part of their care, is a really big trend. And without the revolution of digital health in the last, I'd say, 10 years, it wouldn't be possible. Because I remember in my early 20s, you weren't able to get the same level of data, and you weren't able to go to your doctor and say, hey, these were the tests that I've recently taken, and this is the results, and then work with your doctor on your care. Now, I don't believe that going so far as being like a WebMD doctor for myself is the right call. But getting additional data, being able to monitor things that I discussed with my physician. So I'm an active participant in my care. But still, I'm always going to lead on the doctors who have trained at this and know how to actually guide me to the right thing.
Absolutely. And I think with the coming of AI and some reports saying that, okay, this AI can read this report better than a doctor can, and such reports are out there. Uh, do you think that the battle between AI and doctors can actually get fierce enough in the near future? What do you think?
So I think it makes good headlines. I remember when IBM, I think it was 2014 or 2015, they bought all of those radiology images to try to teach Watson how to become the, automated tech radiologist. And since then there's been obviously a lot of innovation in the radiology space, but at the end of the day you still need a radiologist to do your reads because they're highly trained and they're able to see nuance. Now there has been AI overlays that help a radiologist do a second read or help on some very simple scans to be able to basically churn through things quickly and then get the radiologist to do the second read. But it's saying that like AI will replace, this test or this physician or this specialty. It's more, in my opinion, about buzz and creating that type of fear-based consumption, because it's not only in the medical field. We're seeing it where they push that out about creatives and about movies and music and everything. So either they're all right and AI is going to replace us all and we're all just going to be sitting on the couch doing nothing. That's possible. Or this is a tool for us to use to be able to expand. We have two arms, suddenly we have eight. We can do more. And I think the fear actually really hurts the adoption. And physicians by nature are risk averse. And we want them to be, right? If they were, complete risk seeking behavior, they wouldn't be the people we entrust with our care and our health and our families. And so I think, can we automate and use AI to automate note taking, for patient files? Well, that's a good thing. That's positive. That frees up the doctor to do more care, to be with the patient. Can we help radiologists to get a second read so they can feel more comfortable with what they're doing, instead of kind of like the positioning where like, oh, they might be replaced? It's like I just, and maybe I'm a dinosaur, but the truth is that I don't see it as that. I see it as empowering the physician. And I think because the physician at the end of the day is the one that makes the decision on what they apply in the clinical setting. And so like I've never seen a pitch where it's like, we're going to replace this specialist, ever actually then get FDA clearance or approval, depending, and then get CMS reimbursement and then get a payer decision. Because there's a lot of steps to be successful in the healthcare space, especially when it comes to patient care. And the strongest advocate is, well, the first strongest advocate is the patient themselves, and the second is the physician. And we want their buy-in, and companies should want their buy-in.
Absolutely, completely agree with you. And there's one more key aspect of AI in healthcare, and that is of data privacy and data security, right? Because if AI is listening to all those doctor prescriptions that are happening in real time and taking notes and storing that data and maybe learning on that data, then what happens to data security? And you know that can be risk in that way, because you don't know what AI is going to do with it, right? So, and there's compliance around it as well. How do you handle health data of individuals, right? So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I was actually on a call with one of my strategic advisors, who's been in the pharma space for an exceptionally long time, a brilliant individual. And he was talking about clinical trials on cough, so like focused on like COPT and other breathing issues. And he was like discussing how technology that can be used for cough measurement, so duration of the cough, what was the pitch, and they look at a number of different factors. It is actually a key focus for a lot of clinical trials. There was a tech that was designed at one point that would record every time you coughed, it would record it. The problem was it didn't factor in that if I'm out in public and I start coughing and now you're recording outside conversations. And now you actually hit on wiretap laws and recording laws and all these other things that they hadn't factored in. So they created this great technology with a great measure, but they hadn't designed it to operate in the real world. And it actually led to that being dropped as, some other new technology that's looking at it. But it's so, it's kind of really, I think of also like quality and assurance stuff, or even HIPAA, like tech designed in a vacuum that can't operate in the real world is problematic. And sometimes that's why it's great to have outside advisors and people who could take a look and be like, have you ever thought about this? And give that outside perspective. And so like, we're working with certain early stage companies, and we'll just ask them the simple question of, okay, well, what about the HIPAA considerations? And then we start a whole robust discussion about, how they're going to manage patient data. And if they haven't started thinking about that, they suddenly start thinking about it. It becomes a work stream on its own.
Absolutely. And with AI coming into healthcare and biotechnology, there has been tremendous acceleration in that space as well. All big companies, Google, Microsoft, all coming up with new findings and new models that have actually increased the pace of innovation in the healthcare domain. What are some key areas of accelerated improvement that you're saying or are excited about and closely tracking?
Yeah. So I guess there's a number of different things. So On one side, on the diagnostic side, what's really interesting to me is the movement from just diagnostics to prognostics in nature, and this is something that's possible. So, there's a company that we're working with, Clarity, that recently got FDA clearance for their Clarity breast offering, and they came out of Mass General. And the founder had a question, which is how do we identify the high risk patient population for breast cancer? Because 34% of diagnoses in the indication are in breast cancer are late stage, so stage 3 or later, which is a problem. And mammography is widely adopted and can work very well, but not for all women. Be it But what she realized is, and what Clarity has worked on, is looking at a standard mammogram. They can see the way that breast tissue has developed and the way that it looks, and be able to assess the risk of in 5 years a woman developing breast cancer. And they're able to identify who's medium risk, low risk, and high risk. And so that movement from, like we were discussing earlier with the radiologist, tech to date has been focused on better diagnosis. Now the technology has evolved, so we can look at predicting where people are going to go and what issues they're going to develop. And Clarity is the first FDA clearance of its kind that kind of set the stage for what will be expected of companies in the future to get this type of approval. But it's amazing to see now kind of the where this innovation will go and become. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other innovation happening on therapeutic development and lowering the cost of preclinical, so we can look at different compounds and see what's going to work in a virtual environment. So there's a lot of other innovation, but this is one area that to me is really exciting. It's being able to find the patient who will get sick before they get sick.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very important. And coming to how you evaluate businesses that you're working with, how do you evaluate the investability of a new business that you are tracking?
Yes. So first and foremost is clinical data. We love the brilliant concept and idea. But there's going to be a question of can they develop clinical data, or have they developed clinical data? That's really the differentiator. The market right now and for the last couple of years has probably been the toughest market that I've ever seen in my career. And so, I always kind of tip my hat to the companies that have had challenging raises but are still around and have been able to close around, or even just pull capital internally to keep going on their mission, because that being around at the end of a challenging market for an early stage company is an accomplishment in themselves. And so they should pat themselves on the back. But then it's really for every dollar that they bring in, they need to move towards establishing credibility through clinical data and through the actual utility of their idea. A lot of companies will do their first raise where they'll seed, and then they're like, okay, I need office space and I need to grow. And they start hiring all these people. That early stage, those early stage dollars, use them in the clinic. Push everything should be about the singular mission of accomplishing whatever your goal is. If it's therapeutics, if it's diagnostics, if it's prognostics, it's moving towards that. Because that's the number one thing. Once a company has misstepped and has to do a big pivot or a recap or something like that, it's very tough, because you're saying, well, we were trusted with investor capital for 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, and we utilized it in the best way we knew at the time, but it turned out to be wrong. But now we know how to do it better. So I think the first thing you look at is the vision from the top. It's the leadership, and like how they're applying that. Are they taking a disciplined approach and making sure that they treat investor capital with a certain level of respect? A founder or a team that's raising capital is a steward of investor capital. It's not their money. And I think they need to have that approach. And then the second is, how close they are. There's clinical milestones, because in our field, that's how you differentiate yourself. Is it worked in the clinic? Now we're moving forward. We can apply it in the healthcare environment and actually make a difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an important learning there for founders, that you have to be a steward of capital that you raise, and any missteps can actually cost you big, uh, can cost you the entire company as well at times,
Yeah.
right? So you have to be very careful with that. Uh, with that, let's talk about the go to market approach of healthcare startups. Let's say a new healthcare startup has started. What should be their zero to first traction approach? Should they be raising funding in that duration, or should they try to bootstrap it until then? And what should be their go-to-market strategy there?
So bootstrapping is really, really hard. And I don't think people realize how hard it is, because anytime I don't care who the company is. If someone assumes it's going to be $1 million, it normally costs 1.5 to 2. If they think it's 20, it's 25 to 30. Things become more expensive. It's just the way it works. And when someone tries to bootstrap their first company, and people, obviously there's a lot of examples of people who've done it, but there's a lot of examples of people who've tried it and failed, more just because you run out of runway at a certain point. It becomes really challenging, and then they pull from their credit cards, and then they destroy their credit, all for the goals that they're trying to achieve. And there was the other issue, which is, if you bootstrap through your pre-seed, who's investing in your seed? If you bootstrap through your seed, who's investing in your A? Because what happens is each round kind of helps breed the next round. And so, with the exception of your earliest adopters, your angel investors, a lot of there's going to be people in the local network. So depending on your geography, it's easier or harder. I mean, you know, areas like Austin have a great angel investor scene and have a lot of support. Boston is the same. St. Louis has one. If you're in a region where you really don't have that ecosystem, it could be quite challenging. But let's just say a founder is in an ecosystem where there's angel investor networks, there's pre-seed investors. Having them in your company is going to help, because when you do your seed round, some of them might participate as well, but they also all have friends and they all know other companies. And so it kind of helps fill out your seed round, and then your seed round helps fill out your A. I've seen a lot of companies who get to their A, and like they just don't have any support from the current investors because they've grown too big for their investor group. And now you're trying to find a new lead investor with no allocation to the current investors and say that you're ready to go to market. And it's really, really hard. And a lot more companies than you think end up in that place where they're like, I'm ready to do my Series A. My product has been approved. I can't hire a commercial team. I can't do the market access and the payer work that I have to do because I can't get the funding. And those rounds are so extremely tough, because by the time you get to Series A, they're like, okay, some are saying you need to be commercially ready, but others are saying, I need to see commercial traction. And how can you have commercial traction without the A? So you need the A for the commercial traction for the A. And, it gets quite challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, that makes complete sense. It's like a treadmill, and it's easier to get on when the speed is less, and then increase your speed from there, from round to round. You can progress from there, and it only helps as your body keeps getting warmer. But there's also a separate case for bootstrapping. I think it's a different style of building a company altogether. If you don't plan to raise venture money, if you don't want venture scale, then bootstrap is an option for you. And also, you can open those doors at growth scale when you have proven growth model. You'd still need traction, that is a given. But I think in industries like healthcare or deep tech, that would just be hard to do on just your own money. So I think raising funds would be the best approach. But on the go to market strategy for healthcare startups, what's their first goal or approach? Is like getting to early testers first? Is that the first milestone, or is it more like getting to the product and the early trials? Is that the first goal?
Yeah, and so I think it depends on what the end goal is that you're looking for. So, like, there's some companies that are built to be acquired. They don't want to commercialize their product; they want to sell it. So, really, your goal then is to take your concept or your idea and develop it far enough and get enough clinical data where somebody on the other side can diligence it. And it's a funny business model, because sometimes it's like it's common therapeutics and diagnostics and things like that, where to commercialize that might actually cost, $40 million, 50 or more. And that's not even included what's going to cost for the full clinical trial. And so you know that you need to be part of a bigger system, bigger company. And so then it's really about, how do we make every dollar count in the clinic so we can get clinical data, so they can diligence us, so they can make a decision. And what's important there, I'll also note, is that company should be having discussions with that potential acquirer as early as possible. It's like, because if you're structuring everything and building it so it can be bought, then you should make sure what you're building to be bought meets the specifications that the company's going to need a diligence. And so, that's my thought on that. When it comes to other things, to companies that actually want to grow and scale, research is key. And so, again, going back to getting in the clinic, getting clinical data, being able to publish on it, being able to create research collaborations with leading institutions, the bona fides that are going to give you the credentials you need, because downstream, if you're selling into the hospital systems, if you're selling into primary care, if you're selling into whatever your buyer is going to be, they're going to be looking at who who you've been working with, what you've accomplished in the time. And it's really great to have an awesome product demo and be able to say, look at this. It could completely revolutionize how you're treating patients. And the physician, let's say in a hospital system, might love it. But then you go to the administration and they're one step removed from the clinical workflow. And then we're like, okay, well, where has this been validated? Where has it been de-risked? And you're like, okay, well, we publish papers with this institution. That starts to change things. So you have to think about, how do we build not only the use case and build it to work within the environment we're selling into, but how do we build it? So one of the investors who I had a dinner with, he explained it as, he invests in things where there is an echo chamber. He hears about a deal from one person, then another person, then someone else is talking about it. His network is hearing about it. It's not just, you send an email and you say, here's a cool idea. Do you want to do something here? So you have to build that foundation and build that network, because, investors in today's market, they make consensus decisions, but so do hospital systems, and so do the buyers, and so do the customers, and so even patients. And so, building that credibility and that support is going to be really important.
Absolutely. Makes sense. And I believe that is the exact framework if you want to start selling to big healthcare providers as well. It's through this exact process of building trust and credibility. And after the process is somewhat more mature, then you can start selling to more mature buyers as well,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Uh, so let's talk about the reimbursement maze, right? Securing reimbursement from payers is a critical hurdle for many healthcare innovators, right? What strategies can startups employ early on to increase their chances of favorable reimbursement decisions?
Yeah, this is a really good question, especially for companies that are on the cutting edge of new technology. Because if you have a better version of a prior test, you might be able to leverage a prior CPT code, and so then really it's clearance or approval, and then kind of moving forward with what exists. And then there was obviously great companies that focus primarily in market access and do a lot of work with the payers. And for companies that have the funding, they're great partners. And, like we have a number of them that we call when like a company we're working with has some work there. Um, on the other side, it's really looking at it. And this is part of kind of evaluating the thesis. Um, I think about when the early stage companies are they say, oh, we're going to sell into the concierge physician market. What I hear is, I don't have a payer strategy, or I don't have a full commercialization strategy. Now, some will start there as a means to generate some revenue to then be able to put money to work and do the payer work that's required. But the pharma sector, has a more evolved version of this. As they're submitting for approval, they're already doing their payer work, because it's a very tried and true model. They know how the process goes. And also they have the funding to do that. On the other side, when it comes to early stage startups and kind of the no man's land, which I'll say is like diagnostics, or even, digital AI applied as prognostic and things like that, all of these rules are being written. And then, obviously it's going to be pricing is one of the key things. So like, a lot of the diagnostic companies will try to fight for like the highest pricing possible, which in my mind kind of goes against their whole mission driven messaging. If I'm going to, as a perfect example is, if I'm going to create a diagnostic test in the mental health sector, to identify patients who will benefit the most from medications in schizophrenia, and then I price it at $700, $800, $900 a test. In a market where, schizophrenia as an indication does lean towards having a patient population classified as SMIs, so severely mentally ill individuals that will possibly need a hospitalization, and you know are on a lot of times on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum. So now my test is expensive. My patient population doesn't have means. I haven't done the market work to make sure that I can have the biggest impact. And when I go to the payer and I say, here's the benefit, it's really challenging to keep my cost. And so, some of that work should be done by the startup. It's saying, okay, what is a price that the patient in this sector can actually pay, and then build things around that. So when you're going to the payer, you actually have an economic model that makes sense, and not one that when they do come down and they do push your price down, suddenly your company can't function.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And now to my last question, which is, if you had to give one piece of advice for a founder who's passionate about patient care, healthcare, but is not so much geared towards fundraising or venture capital, what would that piece of advice be?
Um, so I think at its core, treat the VCs like people. Speak to them before you want to raise your money. So most venture funds see, an individual investor in a venture fund will actually really dig into like 1,000 companies or more. Some of them are digging into thousands and thousands of different companies, to find the ones that they're actually going to do work with. And then they actually invest in less than like, 0.01%. Um, because they have to make decisions based on one, patient impact, returns. They're stewards of LP capital, so they're looking at a number of different things, and they're trying to minimize risk and maximize the upside. And so if they meet you on Monday, they're not going to write you a check on a Wednesday. So like I always like to, when we're working with a company they're doing a round, it's like, let's have conversations with people 4 or 5 months before you're going to raise. Go have lunches, talk to them about what you're trying to do, get their input and their thoughts. They have networks. If a VC really likes you and they can't invest for whatever reason, maybe you're too early, they might introduce you to 3, 4 other people who could invest. But you have to be able to make that connection, beyond just kind of treating them like a money pinata. And I think that's the main thing. These are VC investors look at a ton of companies, which means they also say no a lot, means they can tell you why they said no. You can learn from them. They like to mentor passionate founders. And so, again, it's just like anything else. Create the relationship, invest in the relationship. That relationship could pay dividends. And it might be funding, but it might be knowledge. It might just be a great personal relationship. And if they approach everything like that, I have found that when you approach investors like that, for the most part, they actually care about the patient. They care about making an impact. They're just on a different side than the founder, and that makes them a real powerful ally.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great advice for founders listening. Not just in healthcare, but I think regardless of which industry you're operating in, that's great advice. A relationship driven approach always wins. Uh, all right, now to the rapid fire round, wherein I'll ask you 6 quick questions about the investments you're making, and you have to give 6 quick answers, right?
Okay.
So the first one is, what are the sectors and regions you invest in?
I love the liquid biopsy still, but focused on single cancer tests. Pan cancer just hasn't seemed to pan out. Love neurodegenerative on the diagnostic and prognostic side, and anything that starts to break the late stage cancer diagnostics curve and moves that earlier when it's treatable.
Absolutely. What's the typical stage where you're interested in an investment?
Seed to Series A.
Okay, do you lead rounds?
No, we tend to follow. We've also done some off-round investments where we put money directly to working companies that we really believe in.
Okay, what's the typical check size you put in?
So it depends. It's a bit all over the place. I mean, we have $3 million invested in one company, but primarily we're looking at a couple $100,000, and kind of mixing that with the banking services that we offer as well as the consulting services. So we try to kind of marry it all together in a merchant bank approach.
Got it. Where can founders get in touch in case there's a direct approach?
Yeah, so our website is tcbcapitaladvisors.com. We again we try to take that personal approach, and so we welcome inbounds. We love to have discussions with founders, and we might not be the right fit or anything like that, but we're all in the friend business, and so we love to introduce interesting companies where they might be a better fit to somebody else too.
Absolutely. Last one, where can our listeners follow you?
Same. So we have a LinkedIn where we'll put out updates as things happen, and then on our website.
Awesome. I'll make sure to add those links in the
Thank
show
you.
notes below. Thanks so much for making time for this, Sam. It's been an incredible conversation, and I wish you happy investing.
Thank you so much. Pleasure chatting.